I asked 30 Zelda content creators what they want from the next mainline Zelda game, to bring together the Zelda YouTube community and discuss the direction we want to see this legendary series take in the coming years. Tears of the Kingdom is now over 2 years old. It marked the end of the Wild era of Zelda games, the ultimate iteration of this Kingdom of Hyrule. And as we're now only weeks away from the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, the Zelda fanbase is now collectively looking back on the Switch era and dreaming of whatever's next, speculating about what the next big 3D entry in the series could look like. A couple of months ago, I posted a video highlighting 5 things I'd love to see in the next mainline Zelda game. But today, I thought I'd do something different. I've called the banners. For this video, I summoned 30 Zelda content creators, from up-and-comers to ZeldaTube legends, to each give their takes on what they'd love to see in the next 3D game. A huge thank you, of course, to every creator who took the time to join this project. Please treat this video not only as speculation on the next Zelda game, but as a way to discover new ZeldaTubers too. Everyone featured is linked in the description, so please check them out. Right, I'll get out of their way. Here's what Zelda creators want from the next game.
Hello, I am PeanutButterGamer, also known as Peebs. I used to do Zelda Month every November. I've done tons of Zelda videos on my channel. Anyway, nobody cares about that. I'm here to tell you the thing I want the most from the next Zelda game, and I don't know if this is a hot take. It probably is, to be honest. But I know some of you in the comment section will agree with me, so I'm here to air this opinion for you. I want the next Zelda game to not be open world. Don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. I love both of those games. They're really great. I am just personally a little bit tired of the whole open world thing. I feel like every new AAA game, be it Nintendo or otherwise, has to be open world these days. I mean, hell, they're even making Mario Kart open world. Like, I don't really get it. Again, not trying to be a hater. I love those games. And I'm excited for the new Mario Kart. I just miss the traditional, more linear Zelda game. I miss there being a story that you just play through one by one, chapter by chapter, dungeon by dungeon, as opposed to just kind of finding the memories and things out in the world. I know the last linear Zelda game, Skyward Sword, was not received super well by some people. It's probably fairly low on my personal top 10 Zelda games list these days. I think the main problem with that game though was you return to the same areas all the time. At least that was my main problem with it. Twilight Princess, on the other hand, before that, that's probably my, well, it's not my favorite Zelda game, but it's close to it. It's hard to pick favorites, okay? I just miss that style of game. I don't know why I would even bother hoping for it though, because it's basically not going to happen. I mean, Aonuma already said essentially all but that it's not happening. And I mean, Breath of the Wild sold like crazy, so why would they move away from a formula that's working? I don't know. It doesn't mean that a man can't dream though, right? Also, I want the ocarina back. I want to play some songs. If it's gonna be open world, we could at least have the ocarina again, right? That's something. Just give me that at least. Now, on to the next person who will probably have a less boomer opinion than me.
Hi, my name is Don, also known as Monster Maze. I don't really have a sales pitch prepared, but I make Zelda videos of all different kinds, be it lore, gameplay analysis, development history, basically anything I feel compelled to talk about in the moment. So go check it out if you're interested. I'm sure there'll be something on screen or in the description or something. Now, normally when I discuss the future of Zelda, I tend to gravitate towards dungeons, since it's by far my favorite aspect of the series. But since I'm sharing the stage with the dungeon master himself, CaptBurgerson, I'm gonna let him have this one and try something different. So let's talk about mini dungeons instead. I know this is highly subjective, but for me personally, the whole shrine concept has kind of run its course. I definitely get the idea and the philosophy behind it, you know, splitting one bigger challenge up into small micro challenges to reduce time commitments, but for me it did take away from the surprise factor the series is known for. I vividly remember watching the gameplay demonstration for Breath of the Wild back in 2014, and hearing Miyamoto say, "Oh, this looks suspicious, we must be near a dungeon." Now, this was well before the whole Sheikah technology theme was introduced, so instantly I started to imagine all the different environments we could stumble upon which could serve as a dungeon or mini dungeon. Abandoned tombs, an old shipwreck, a hidden mansion deep inside a forest somewhere, an ancient mineshaft perhaps, all waiting to be explored. But as we know now, that's not really how Breath of the Wild works. Because no matter what kind of structure you find, where you find it, or what kind of riddle or challenge you are met with, you know that 99% of the time it leads to one of the many Sheikah shrines, all of which share the same aesthetics, the same music, and can easily be overcome in under a few minutes. This was fine for the first 10 hours or so, but once you've picked up on this pattern, the whole discovery aspect can start to feel a bit predictable and formulaic, artificial even. To be fair, there were a few outliers, where the area or structure itself does something unique, and the shrine is merely there to collect a reward, like Eventide, Typhlo Ruins, and the Labyrinths, but those were pretty rare, all things considered. Now, my hope was that the sequel would solve these issues, and while it did improve on some of the shortcomings of its predecessor, on some levels it's arguably even worse here, because despite my gripes with the shrines, the majority of Breath of the Wild's locations were at the very least one of a kind, and exciting to come across. But what Tears of the Kingdom does is it basically took the shrine concept and applied it to practically everything. This time there's not just one Colosseum, but several of them. There are dozens of mines, all of which look the same and have little to no substance. Many sky islands have near identical twins out there, so on and so forth. Every well, every cave, every Yiga base, everything has been copy-pasted several times across the map, with only minor changes to set them apart. It's a very strange design philosophy for a Zelda game, because one of the biggest strengths of the series has always been how distinct its locations are, and the amount of detail the developers put into them. Like, imagine for a moment if instead of the bottom of the well we all know from Ocarina of Time, the whole thing was chopped up into 20 smaller wells and scattered throughout the overworld, all with the same aesthetics and the same music. I suspect that it wouldn't have been nearly as memorable, and yet that's exactly what they did in Tears of the Kingdom. In fact, the whole design philosophy seems to be that no matter where you drop into the map, you are guaranteed to run into approximately the same things. The locations in the older games were special exactly because there was only one place like it, which also meant that the developers could focus all their attention on fleshing them out. I mean, I can't be the only one who was severely disappointed that the secret door that leads into the 8th heroine statue, one of the most endearing mystery locations from Breath of the Wild, ended up leading to nothing more than a small generic cave, right? Or that we still couldn't enter Akkala Citadel and were instead met with another generic cave. I guess what I'm trying to say with all of my ramblings is that when it comes to optional content like mini dungeons, I hope future Zelda games will be a bit more focused again. Instead of 125 near identical shrines, 58 wells, or 174 similar looking caves, I'd much rather have, say, 30 well thought out complex mini dungeons with their own look and feel, their own music, their own history and lore, maybe even some unique enemy types that you don't find anywhere else. I think it would make for a much more memorable experience. That said, I do feel optimistic about the future of Zelda. Echoes of Wisdom, for example, already demonstrated some of the potential for a future 3D title. It not only brought back the more traditional dungeon style and linear storytelling, but it also featured a few optional mini dungeons, which genuinely caught me by surprise. And despite my complaints about Tears of the Kingdom, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that it still featured some very unique and memorable locations. Things that stood out from everything else, like the ancient Gerudo prison, for example. That's the kind of stuff I want to see more of.
The future of Zelda is not the overworld, it's the underworld. Breath of the Wild created a formula for overworld exploration that is near impossible to improve upon. But dungeons? I mean, those have been stagnant since 1986. Oh, silly me, wait a minute, that's when the first Zelda game came out. Because they have not changed! Every single dungeon is a self-contained puzzle box that exists separate from the rest of the world. You go into the dungeon, you disappear for a few hours, and then you exit from the exact same location you entered from. Dungeons are a dead end. But they could be so much more. If Nintendo wants to fix the Zelda series, we must stop focusing on the yang and draw our attention to the yin. So peer into my crystal ball, and let me show you what the future of Zelda dungeons will be like. Imagine this. You enter the water temple to hunt a mysterious artifact, but along the way, you find a secret entrance. You follow this entrance and slowly the temperature begins to rise, until eventually the water puzzles shift into lava traps and you discover that you have accidentally wandered into the Death Mountain region on the other end of the map. Do you choose to keep exploring this path, or do you place a marker on your map to mark this pathway and then double back from the direction you came? This is the underworld. A web of dungeons all interconnected like a spider web, allowing you to explore every inch of the underworld without ever stepping foot on the surface. The only reason you'll need to return up there is for supplies and quests, because surely in the underworld you're not going to be finding much food. While you're down here, you might even spot a fellow adventurer, or a lost trader down here who's willing to trade supplies.
Richer.
Those kinds of interactions will be rare. This formula might sound familiar because it was attempted by Tears of the Kingdom in the form of the Depths. But because the Depths are a flat expanse and because it lacks variety, it failed totally. On the other hand, Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild was an excellent example of this formula, but it was done on too small a scale. No, a much better example of this formula being put into practice would be the Legend of Zelda TV series. In it, we see a world of endless dungeons where you can enter from one point and exit from somewhere else entirely different. After many journeys down here, Link is considered a seasoned traveler in the underworld, and he knows the best routes for getting to and from each location. Having some self-contained dungeons would be beneficial too, but I don't want an entire game of just self-contained dungeons. Not again. Oh, also to address the elephant in the room, Tears of the Kingdom dungeons do not fit this vision of an underworld. They are open-ended, and they can be approached from many different directions, but they would each need to span a much larger chunk of the map to form an actual network. Now, the original teaser for Tears of the Kingdom, that shows promise. And in fact, I have a theory that Nintendo originally had this idea in mind for the Depths, but for some reason ran out of time. But that's just a theory, a game theory. In short, to improve the Zelda formula, dungeons must become a part of the journey, not just a destination. Finn? If you can tolerate my voice and are interested in facts about the Legend of Zelda series, then look up The Bread Pirate. You won't regret it. Time for the next person.
What's going on, everyone? I'm Austin Chan. I do tutorials and tips and tricks here on YouTube for Zelda and Pokemon games. If you played Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, there's a chance you've seen my videos and there's a chance I've helped you out. That's because I love those games, and I hope you do too. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were huge shakeups to the Zelda formula, so much so that a lot of people don't even consider those games to be, quote, real Zelda games, just because of how much of a reimagining the whole concept of, instead of a linear story progression, being a full open world truly showed itself. Last year, we were able to see how that open world concept could influence the linear story structure in Echoes of Wisdom, which was a fantastic little game. You being able to explore any of these areas at a certain time, any of these areas at a certain time, and kind of go throughout the entire map whenever you want. Yes, some of the abilities were gate-kept behind certain levels of progression because of Tri's ability, but there was a very large turning point in the middle of the game that you had to go to Hyrule Castle, and then the second half of the game opened up. That immediately got me thinking to another game that did something really quite similar, Ocarina of Time. I would love to see a reimagining, a retelling of Ocarina of Time with that same open world concept. Ocarina of Time starts out with you going to the Great Deku Tree, followed by you going and exploring and helping the Zoras and the Gorons. And then large events happen, and then you go to Hyrule Castle. And then the second half of the game happens. Having a more open gameplay structure, I think would be really fantastic and a new way to approach a game that's been engraved in a lot of gamers' hearts and memories for the last 2 decades. With the 40th anniversary of the Legend of Zelda franchise and the fact that Breath of the Wild was actually derived from a reimagining of the NES game, I don't think this is too far-fetched of a concept. I think it'd be fantastic and better than just a, here's an HD port on another system. What do you think? Maybe it's so good of an idea that Zeltic's gonna make a video in a month about this. Who knows? All right, who's up next?
Hey guys, my name is Luke, I go by ZeldaMaster Online. Also, I'm Zeltic's co-host over on Zeldudes, and to answer Zeltic's question on what I want most in the next Zelda game, well, outside of the obvious, having a better, more structured story, less crappy rewards from side quests, and of course the main one being the return of classic, long-form, traditional Zelda dungeons, well, I do want all of that. There's one thing I want more than all of those, and that being music. Yes, I want the return of musical instruments and having to solve musical-related puzzles by playing those musical instruments, but not only that. I also want the glaring and blaring in-your-face themes that identified each and new area you went to and gave it a theme and vibe that Zelda was known for prior to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Of course, you could argue because it was the Wild series, it had more nature sounds in the background that sort of acted like an ambiance to the atmosphere you were currently in. And I get that, but I think it's time to go back to the roots, what made Zelda so special. Because the lively music was one of the main aspects that brought those areas to life and made it feel so special with each and every location you visited. And while it does sorta exist in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, at least when it comes to the main settlements, it still is completely absent, like the Lost Woods sharing the same theme as the mazes, kinda not giving a significance to each area when you would visit it regarding the theme. Like, I really miss running down Hyrule Field and having the theme each morning pick up on this high note as it slowly simmers down to nighttime and then everything gets quiet. It is so missed that, yeah, it just feels weird and not having it in the Zelda series anymore. Like, even down to the title screens, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are completely void of that, when some of the best soundtracks came from the title screens, like Ocarina of Time and The Wind Waker or Twilight Princess. But of course, the background themes aren't the only thing I'm missing in regards of music. It's also the musical instruments. Hell, we had games like Ocarina of Time and The Wind Waker. The instrument itself was pretty much the main thing of those games. And again, while you could argue that in Breath of the Wild you had Cass with his accordion, it just wasn't the same. Link is the musician. I want Link to play the music, to solve puzzles, to bring happiness to people, to just overall change the mood and vibe of things with each new song he learned and had to play at certain moments. Hell, even Twilight Princess not having instruments still had Wolf-Link howl certain themes that were references to past Zelda games. Zelda, while a gaming series, is not just special for its gameplay. There are so many factors in why we are fans of it today. From the beautiful environments and scenery that we visit and the characters that we find that inhabit throughout it, to the deep and rich story that really bring together this world of fantasy, to obviously the music that brings it all together and makes it so memorable and special to us. From emotional tracks that were a major factor in setting that feeling that you would have during a certain cutscene or moment throughout the game. Or to the exciting tracks that really set the stage for a boss or a temple that really made those areas a lot more memorable because of it. Or really just the atmospheric tracks that would really bring the overall environment together of where you were visiting and really identified it. Music has been a key factor in why Zelda games have felt the way they did. Without it, it wouldn't bring out all this emotion and whimsy that you can get from playing a video game. And again, it just wasn't about the background music, but how it was integrated in its core gameplay with how you played instruments to solve puzzles, teleport around, or just use it to interact with certain characters or environments. It was integral to what made Zelda Zelda. So while I sound redundant, it's just to point out how crucial music was to Zelda and its world building, and with the absence of it, the series just doesn't feel the same. But there is so much I would like to see change or return into the next Zelda game, but out of anything, I would have to say music is definitely up there, because again, the series doesn't feel the same without it. But anyways, thank you Zeltic for having me. I go by ZeldaMaster on YouTube, or you can check out both Zeltic and I together over on our co-op channel Zeldudes, but that does it for me.
Hey up everyone, I'm Triforce Trends and I'm here to talk about that one part of Zelda games that we all love getting to, the dungeons. A lot of the Zelda titles released before 2017 and after A Link to the Past had very similar formats, especially in the 3D games. Most of the time you'd be going in a linear pattern through every dungeon barring Link Between Worlds. So this meant that themes could be clearly defined and story beats could continue in a linear order. And you know what, I like this style a lot, but it's also why a lot of people decided that we needed a series shakeup. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's dungeon format come under a lot of scrutiny. Personally, the Lightning Temple and Wind Temple from the latter is a big step up from the rest of the temples and Divine Beasts. These games have you finding dungeons in whatever order you want to do them in, and they place a marker on the map for you to find them. Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild also has a lot to like about it. In fact, before Tears of the Kingdom released, I remember that a lot of people were wanting the format of Hyrule Castle to be used throughout all of its dungeons in the upcoming game. Now here's where we come to the Spirit Temple. Why do I mention it? It's actually the most unique non-final dungeon in both these games, in that it can be found basically whenever you stumble upon it. In the next game, I want more of this, but at the same time, they should absolutely still be looking to try and mesh the open formats of recent titles to the linear format of past titles. To be honest, I don't exactly see why linear dungeons can't just work in these open world games. My favourite Zelda title is Twilight Princess. One of that game's faults is having amazing dungeon items but not really utilising them outside of the dungeons that they're found in, with few exceptions. It would be a pretty big trade-off, but one I think a lot of us would appreciate if we could go through dungeons in any order and then going through the dungeons themselves, laid out pretty similarly to old traditional Zelda dungeons, with the bombastic themes, the mini-bosses, the dungeon items, all of that good stuff. As many people have said, I think they just need to mesh traditional dungeons into an open world. The state of Zelda games is really strange at the moment because there were 5 3D games in the traditional format back in the linear days, and yeah, people did get bored of that format over time, but because of Tears of the Kingdom reusing the era of Wild's open world, it kind of feels like this brand new open air format is almost already becoming as tired as that traditional formula. A better mesh of the new and the old for the next brand new 3D Zelda game would be the best of both worlds, but I will fully admit that the Zelda team will have to be smart to integrate dungeon items into the open world without it feeling like a totally linear experience. This being said, I'd also still like to see more dungeons you can just stumble across, like the Spirit Temple if you randomly found that. I definitely can't have my cake and eat it too in this case. I think that the idea of just exploring this wide open world and randomly running into full-scale dungeons is a dream for many, many Zelda fans, especially post-Breath of the Wild, so I just want to see that dream realised. It'd be beyond fun. My wish is for the coolest dungeons we've seen since Twilight Princess, basically. I'll get on my hopium kick early with this wish. Thanks for the chance to be here, Zeltic, and I hope some of you agree.
Hey folks, Hyrule Gamer here. One thing that I would really love to see make a return in the next big mainline Zelda game is underwater exploration. It's funny, because I myself actually hate swimming into deep water, but the idea of being able to dive down into the depths of Lake Hylia again with Link sounds amazing. I really loved being able to swim beneath the waves in games like Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, the former more so as it had a dungeon set below Lake Hylia, including a boss battle that was fought fully underwater. This and more is something I'd love to see make a return, especially knowing how powerful the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be. I think there's a great opportunity for the Zelda team to really add this back in. Some things I'd like to see done with underwater exploration is the inclusion of an underwater settlement for the Zora. Perhaps in this next game, Zora's domain is located at the bottom of a great lake, or at least we need to swim to the depths of one to enter. But what would really flesh this out in my opinion is environmental details and lore anywhere we could dive into, coming across shipwrecks, ancient underwater ruins, and finding wee details like a bottle with a note just sitting in the sand at the bottom of a lake, sparking a new quest. Maybe even small mini-dungeons that are accessed through underwater caves. Filling the explorable underwater sections with genuine content to explore and discover is what would make or break this feature for me. I don't want to just swim for the sake of swimming. I'd really love for there to be a good amount of content to find below Hyrule's waters. Naturally, there would have to be an underwater dungeon similar to the Lakebed Temple if this was to return, somewhere that requires Link to swim deep down and find a long-lost temple with an evil lurking inside. It's just an idea, but I'd really love to see some sort of octopus or kraken-themed boss that we battle underwater similar to Morpheal. All of this would also come with underwater species and enemies, swimming with fish and other aquatic animals in rivers and lakes, but also swimming with sharks and other large creatures if the next game features the seaside or an ocean area in general. Please Nintendo, let Link go diving again.
the latest mainline game. And what people expect from it, I think we all know what's missing. The missing link, if you would. See what I did? Okay. But I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that what I want from the next game is tanks. It was there the whole time, staring us in the face. That's what we need. Tank warfare. Okay, jokes aside, what I would actually like to see from the next mainline game is a sense of balance. A perfectly balanced game.
As all things should be.
And by that, what I mean is a game that perfectly balances what made classic Zelda great and what made the new era of Zelda brought about by the advent of Breath of the Wild great. When Breath of the Wild hit the scene, it completely redefined Zelda as a franchise, but so too did it completely redefine the fandom, where yes, it did introduce a great wave of new recruits to the world of Hyrule, so too did it alienate its fair share of veterans. It completely fragmented the fandom. So what we need is a marriage of the old and the new. Something that can hold dear to the past that literally built the Zelda we know today. And something progressive. Something that looks forward so that the franchise doesn't stagnate and wither. The combination of the two, yin and yang, a roof that all Zelda fans can reunite under. A game that we can all play, all enjoy, and of course, all theorize about. And that is what I would like to see in the next mainline Zelda game. Having said that, tanks wouldn't go amiss either.
One of my favorite parts of Tears of the Kingdom is just building random vehicles, and one of my favorite ways to do so are to build waterfront vehicles. Sailboats, rafts, and ships. I just love sailing the seas in Tears of the Kingdom. It's so much fun to try and build a vehicle that can navigate the waters efficiently. Really, the only drawback is just that there isn't a lot of reason to navigate the waters in Tears of the Kingdom. The rivers are not very hard to cross, and there isn't much to find by sailing the seas to the east and south of Hyrule. And so my biggest wish for the next Zelda game, especially if it's one that's maintaining the gameplay formula we currently have, is that we get to take to the seas. I don't know that I'm quite asking for the Breath of the Wild version of Wind Waker, because I would like each landmass to be significantly bigger than what we got in that game. The Wind Waker mostly focused on many small islands, whereas I would like a smaller amount of quite large islands. I guess the best way to put it is that I would like it if each island was about the size of a region in Breath of the Wild, and they were separated from one another by an ocean, with smaller islands peppering the spaces between. In fact, those smaller islands could serve the same purpose as a shrine, with each island having its own puzzle to solve. And then a core part of the game would be building ships to navigate the sea, or perhaps you would rather build some sort of aircraft. It would all be up to you. I just think that sailing is so much fun in Tears of the Kingdom, and I very desperately wish there was a better reason for it, and I think that idea could serve as a great basis for a new title using this open-air Zelda format. We could get something even greater than the Wind Waker. Thanks for listening, folks. My name is Nayru. I have a variety of content on my channel. Lately, I've been making a lot of very meta videos talking about discourse within the Zelda community. Although within a few days of you watching this video, I will probably be launching the first video in a brand new iceberg series, which when completed will be the biggest Zelda iceberg on YouTube. So if you're at all interested in either of those things, come check me out on YouTube.
Hey everyone, Ryan64 here. Thank you so much Zeltic for having me featured in your video. It means a lot. As some of you may already know, I make a ton of Zelda opinion related videos on my channel, ranging from rankings to worst/best in every game, and even reacting to subscriber submitted hot takes. One of my most successful videos to date is ranking every 3D Zelda dungeon from worst to best. In that video, I had shared my opinion on Tears of the Kingdom's dungeon roster, which I claimed was a huge step up from the dungeons in Breath of of the Wild, but still quite underwhelming. Dungeons are my personal favorite parts of The Legend of Zelda as a whole, and also some of the biggest things holding the Wild games back compared to the rest of the franchise. The very open world of these games didn't mesh well at all with the more traditional dungeons, as certain temples, like the Fire Temple, can be completely cheesed and like 50% of the dungeon can be skipped over without even trying. A large part of this is due to the lack of classic Zelda items. I don't mind if Nintendo keeps the abilities like Fuse, Ascend, or Ultra Hand, but I would also love to see items like the Hookshot, Whip, or even the Spinner make a return. Out of every dungeon in this game, the Lightning Temple was easily the best and closest to a traditional Zelda dungeon. This is all thanks to the tighter and more condensed environment. Also tying into dungeons, I would love to see the return of unique dungeon objectives, like the Forest Temple and how you have to defeat the 4 Poe sisters, or the Tower of Hera, that requires Link to scale up the many floors of the dungeon, rather than just flipping 5 switches, which gets old really fast. Overall, I think Nintendo had the right idea going into Tears of the Kingdom, but the very flawed dungeon roster doesn't hold up as well as the other games in the franchise. Another one of my biggest issues with the most recent Zelda games, specifically Tears of the Kingdom, was the overall story. This story is very flawed, but my most prominent complaint comes in the form of the memories. Why on earth can you unlock the memories in any order you want? I've always thought it was so stupid how you can literally spoil the story yourself by just playing the game. I would love to see the return of different sections of Hyrule being unlocked through story progression. Unlocking new chunks of the map was something I'd always look forward to when playing the older Zelda games. Take Twilight Princess for example. Unlocking areas like Snow Peak or the Gerudo Desert really makes you feel like your progression is working towards something, rather than just having the whole map available from the start. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the huge land of Hyrule from the Wild games, but I feel like Nintendo was striving for more quantity over quality, which is something I've never been a fan of. Finding a perfect middle ground between an interesting and unique overworld combined with the huge open maps of the recent games would be ideal. Speaking of the map, it's been a while since we got a parallel overworld like the Dark World or Lorule. I mean, technically you could count the depths as an alt world, but that area is just kinda really boring. The Wild games feature one of my favorite art styles in the entire series. I love the vibrant colors mixed with the more realistic character designs, though I still think Nintendo should try and take a new artistic approach with the next 3D Zelda, since there has never been more than 2 3D Zelda games with the same art style, and it might get a bit repetitive if they try and use it again, which would take away from my enjoyment of these beautiful visuals. Overall, I think that there is a lot of change that needs to happen during the development of the next 3D Zelda game, but despite my criticisms, I think Nintendo is on the right path. Tears of the Kingdom is a huge step up from Breath of the Wild, and I can definitely see the series return to a semi-traditional Zelda game sometime in the near future. Again, a huge thank you to Zeltic for featuring me in this video. It means so much and I really appreciate it. My name is Ryan64 and I hope to see you guys again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Hello everyone, I'm Tyler Townsend, a Zelda creator that covers the series here on YouTube. Be it through trailer breakdowns, reviews, you name it. If you've seen a full-grown man crying during a Zelda reaction, there's a good chance that could have been me. As for what I'd like to see from the next Zelda title though, I'd love to see an evolving world that is dictated by player choice. The era of the Wild games are genre defining for sure, but there's still aspects of them that feel kinda dated. For me, that boils down a lot to the story and the world building. It's becoming more of an industry standard nowadays for these big blockbuster open world titles to heavily incorporate player choice into every aspect of the game. RPGs like The Witcher 3 a decade ago really pioneered this kind of storytelling, with more recent releases like Baldur's Gate 3 heavily shaping the game around your decisions. I'd love to see this kind of mechanic utilized more in the next Zelda game. I think it would greatly improve the immersion and create a more gripping main story while fleshing out all these smaller narratives going on. Imagine if most quests were as in-depth and engaging as say something like the mayoral questline in Tears of the Kingdom. Except you could actually dictate who the winner was, and have Hateno Village heavily altered depending upon who you picked. This not only creates a more personal experience, but incentivizes multiple playthroughs. For those out there that have critiques on how Zelda stories are told, this would give the player the ability to shape the plot however they see fit. A huge thank you to Zeltic for including me, and if you'd like to see some Zelda content from someone who loves the series so much that every new trailer makes them cry, then I'd love to see you over on my channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.
everyone, I'm Absurd Zelda Theories, and over on my channel I work on absurd Zelda theories. I'm actually working on one right now with Zeltic about what happened to Navi the Fairy, and I don't even think it's that absurd. Anyway, right now, the next 3D Zelda game, let's have a think. Well, I love Wind Waker's art style, and I definitely feel like Wind Waker didn't get a proper sequel with Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, so I'd love to revisit that. I love the way that Tears of the Kingdom and Echoes of Wisdom allowed you to proceed to a puzzle and just tackle it any way you wanted. Your idea is the right idea is a wonderful way to play Zelda games. I love that. I want aesthetic variety though. I think in both the shrines, both the shrines from both games, the fact that they all look the same kind of bothers me a little bit. I think Zelda is a franchise about visiting the elemental homes of fire and the forest and water, and I think that should take a bigger role. Ganondorf as an amiibo. Okay, so this is something that like in Twilight Princess, if you play on hero mode, you take double damage, but if you use the Ganondorf amiibo, you take quadruple damage, and it makes Twilight Princess so much fun for those people who have played it time and time again. And the Cave of Ordeals in that situation, incredible. I don't know why Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom don't have difficulty multipliers when you add the Ganondorf amiibo, but I definitely want that back. But what I don't want back is Ganondorf himself. Ganondorf is the name of my cat, bless him. This is Ganondorf. He makes everything 4 times easier. But I want Vaati and Zant to get a little bit more screen time. I think it's time for these guys to not just be like one-time done deals. And I know Vaati had 3 games, but like I want to learn more about the human side of Vaati. I want to see more of that. Oh, and finally, lore. Let's give the game the most absurd lore. Let's poke at people who really think that Zelda's supposed to have like a consistent canon and give them lore that messes up with everything they already know, so that then you and I can come up with some absurd Zelda theories to try and tie it all together.
Hi everyone, it's me, famous YouTuber Skittybitty. You may have seen a short little video I made last year about Tears of the Kingdom. It might surprise you to learn that I actually have some pretty strong feelings about the Legend of Zelda series. There are a lot of things I'd like to see in a new 3D Zelda game, but I think the main one is a smaller, more thoughtfully designed world. One of the main weaknesses shared by both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is the often shallow and repetitive nature of much of its content. There's not much room in these games for fully realized ideas. Far too often, they're chopped up, rationed out, and spread thin across a massive play area. If the developers weren't so concerned with filling up an unnecessarily huge map, they could focus their efforts on things like environmental storytelling, or crafting complex and memorable side quests, or designing puzzles with more than one step. Something I love about the Wild Era version of Hyrule is how I was able to familiarize myself with it to the point that it almost felt like a second home. But that experience should be accessible to everyone, not just the people with hundreds of hours to kill. For that matter, I don't think Zelda games should be hundreds of hours long in the first place. I don't want another Zelda game that I'll never 100% complete because I can't summon the motivation to go hunting for hundreds of worthless collectibles. I want a Zelda game that I can replay over and over again, one that's full of content that I actually look forward to revisiting. I know that open world games in general are plagued by a more is more mentality, but when you think about the influence that Breath of the Wild had on open world games as a whole, a smaller Zelda game with more meaningful content could have a reverberating effect that makes games better across the board. How likely is that to actually happen? I don't know, but can't a plushie dream?
Hi, my name is Bandit. I like video game stories a little too much. Probably a lot too much, and I talk about them over on my channel Bandit Games, mostly about The Legend of Zelda, which is why I'm here. I even got a Zelda tattoo recently. So you know I'm a real Zelda fan. Huge thank you to Mr. Zeltic, our Prometheus, for having me on today. But not to take up too much time here, let's cut through the Korok seeds and get straight to the point. Contrary to what a lot of commenters over on my channel think, I actually quite enjoyed Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for what they were. But one critique that I had for both games ever since the release of the first game, Breath of the Wild, 8 years ago, was actually in its reward system. See, as a senior citizen, back in my day, Zelda games had unique rewards for pretty much everything. Take the Lake Bit Temple of Twilight Princess, for instance. It might be a confusing drag to get through, but you were still stoked once you got past that gross mini-boss and it vomited up that gross chest covered in that gross goop, but you still opened it and then out popped, what was this? The claw shot. Easily one of the best items in the entire game. That automatically makes the entire dungeon worth it. Like I can even forgive that huge spinning staircase puzzle thing. Maybe. Minigames from Ocarina of Time would reward upgraded bomb bags or maybe quivers, and the list goes on and on. But in the Wild era of Zelda games, all of that is gone. Link can just hold unlimited quantities of whatever stuff he wants to from the get-go, and his arsenal of tools is completely replaced by a set of powers that you get off the bat, which is cool in its own right, but because these games were designed to be non-linear experiences that you could go in any direction at any point in time, that means that the rewards have to all be of equivalent value, which is to say of no value. Well, okay, not no value, but more like the value of 2 hearty radishes or something. You get my point. I would like to see a return to the valuable rewards from the various ventures that our hero will embark upon from the Zelda games of old. And let's zoom out a little bit. I'd also like to see a return to the sense of value as a whole, like uncovering a linear story that has to be played to us in cutscenes that have to be experienced one after the other, otherwise they won't make sense. You know, so that we avoid pesky little situations like when we might hear the words Demon King or Secret Stone one too many times. Secret Stone? Demon King? But I digress. Once again, a humongous thank you to Zeltic for inviting Old Bandit on the video, and to you for watching the Old Bandit segment of this video.
A story that evolves with us as we play on. No more memories, no more 100 years ago, no more distant past. If there's one thing that the current open-air generation of Zelda games ruined in many ways, it was our connection to the world and storytelling as we progressed through the games. From being the big highlights of the games, especially tied to events following completion of dungeons, we have gone to a situation where we don't really care about story anymore in The Legend of Zelda. And that is truly disastrous, because The Legend of Zelda used to be the big storytelling franchise in-house from Nintendo. We had great games like Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Majora's Mask, Skyward Sword, of course, which all managed to convey beautiful stories. And yes, story limits and causes more linearity than the open world does. But it doesn't mean that we should just be stuck to some fragmented memories. And in the latest case of Tears of the Kingdom, where Link doesn't even appear, causing even more of a detachment from the story that is being presented. And that's also one of the big problems of Age of Imprisonment, namely the fact that the main character that we play as in the Legend of Zelda games, and in the case of the 3D games, all of them, is not to be found in these memories and is not found in the Age of Imprisonment game. So what is the solution? For one, you could maintain the memory structure, but have more gameplay leading in or out of the cutscenes, like we are likely to see now in Age of Imprisonment. But we need to see this also in The Legend of Zelda. We've been arguing about this already for a long time, since the day of Breath of the Wild, and how to make the memories feel more immersive and not game-breaking. With a story, like in, say, Twilight Princess for example, what we lost by adding the memories are moments of urgency. Moments where you, right after a cutscene, were thrown into a gameplay scenario which you need to get this person from location A to B as quickly as possible. And all while some beautiful music was playing. Midna's Lament is the perfect example of this, where you get attacked by one of the biggest antagonists of that game, and then you have to rush in a format that you're not very comfortable with, but it creates one of the most beautiful video game sequences of all time. And I think those linear sequences are also something that would benefit the storytelling of the next Legend of Zelda game. It would add a deeper meaning and much more immersion for us as gamers into the moment here and now. Because the only moments we really had that was in the build-up to the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom. There were some good fragments there, but outside of that, not really. And that's because it's all about that non-linearity. So my suggestion is a little bit more linearity, but taking examples from games, say like The Witcher 3, for example, or even Red Dead Redemption 2, it will break some of the freedom that we've had in these 2 latest open-air Zelda games, but at the same time, what we would gain in return is a story and progression that we truly get invested into, and where we can see more active villains that don't just sit and wait there. Instead, we have active antagonists, just like we had in Skyward Sword and in Twilight Princess with Girahim and Zant. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be linear like it is in those games. You can just have them location-based by when you get to this certain area, you trigger an event. Say that this event also is not arbitrary, but it doesn't have to be in this specific location. It's just that, oh, you've progressed to this point now in the story, here is this event. And it can happen in different locations and be more dynamic than we have seen in past Zelda games as well. Like, I think a lot of that kind of experimentation is what will bring it to a whole new level. And just have the story develop as we play instead of actually having to seek out the story by going to location of dragon teardrops or recalling your own memory. I think that is the way to go, and we can take some inspiration from other third-party games, but also the Zelda games of the past. That is the way to go forward, and combining linearity with the non-linearity of the open world is probably the way to go for the future of The Legend of Zelda. So yeah, where you can find me, it's on Commonwealth Realm on YouTube and on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. We cover mostly, of course, the next Zelda game, but also just in general looking at upcoming Zelda games, reviews, theories, and topical videos and the like. So if you enjoy all aspects of The Legend of Zelda, including reviews, including theories, more speculative content, then you will find yourself right at home. And once again, thank you so much for being able to join this massive collab, Zeltic.
Hey everyone, HMK here, Zelda theorist, hype man, and challenger. What do I want in the next Zelda? Well, that's wild. Breath of the Wild. Cause the sky is the limit. Skyward Sword is the limit. Alright, enough of that, sorry. I'm sure a bunch of my colleagues here covered a ton of perspective elements for the next Zelda, but personally, I love to see more robust RPG elements in the next Legend of Zelda, both inside and outside of combat. Not to say I want a full-on RPG out of Zelda, as the games have danced around those elements for years. I would like a more fleshed out integration in the next Zelda. Check this out. Take what we've seen in Zelda before when it comes to the more intricate battle elements, such as parries from the Wind Waker and hidden skills from Twilight Princess. While they added a substantial push forward in combat flow and battle thought process, take it up a notch by adding more flair and properties to these combat elements that may be upgraded and tweaked through the use of a skill tree that could reside within each specific weapon you acquire in the game, as well as Link himself. This way, we can get a more custom approach to the combat that allows the philosophy of forging our path to take a new form in the next Zelda, possibly having specific attacks and movements buff Link or debuff the enemy. Maybe even taking the surrounding area into account to give contextual effects, such as Link utilizing the surrounding area to dispatch foes in different ways, or gaining abilities due to what is around him in terms of friend, foe, fauna, and flora. Let these elements reach their peak in terms of finishers. Different finishers that can give Link different options in continuing the battle. Easy ideas include vamp effects, in which Link restores his health for every enemy he's defeated. But how about ideas where Link strikes down an enemy using a finisher imbued with holy light that produces an AoE that inflicts fear on the surrounding enemies that drastically lowers their morale and strength. I can go on and on about combat, but let me get my thoughts out on progression really quick. Exploration is one of the keys to Zelda. Many feel conflicted on the approach that the next Zelda should take, a more open one or a more structured one. Well, I like to see aspects of both worlds. An open, explorative adventure, but to a specific degree that will still need a structured progression in terms of items or story elements to open a yet undiscovered path or dungeon. But I would love to see Zelda take a page or two out of Xenoblade and Fire Emblem's book, specifically Three Houses. Let me elaborate. With Xenoblade, I would love to see a vast and varied Zelda world that is separated into expansive zones that could be explored in a specific order. But that order isn't dictated by if and when you get to that specific point, but by the choices you made in the previous zone that allows a path to open to the next specific zone. That is where I get to my next point for Three Houses, where the story can also be taken on in that approach that is curated to your experiences and choices on where you decide to go and what you decide to do. While the end result of the game could be the same in multiple facets, particular aspects of said ending will be affected by these choices and paths that grant you a specific title at the end of the game. Won't that be something awesome to talk about and share with other Zelda fans? While Zelda has tackled the idea of leading your own adventure in different ways with different games over the years, I feel that this direction is a frontier still unknown and begging to be found. Well, that is what I think. This has been HMK, and be sure to check out my channels for more Zelda. The future is ours.
Lorulean Historian here. I occasionally make theory videos, live stream games, and share translations and insights into the rich lore of the Zelda series whenever I can. And as a longtime Zelda fan, I'm deeply invested in this franchise. I loved the open-air freedom of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Both games did what they set out to do extremely well, and their stories were pretty solid. But I often found their narrative impact and my own immersion diminished by how non-linear everything was. Yes, exploration is fantastic. The freedom to go anywhere, climb anything, it's empowering. But without meaningful limitations, that freedom can start to feel hollow. After a while, the vast world starts to blur together. It's easy to get lost, not just geographically, but emotionally. Echoes of Wisdom brought something refreshing, a return to light structure. There was still plenty of places to explore, but you couldn't just go anywhere instantly. Some walls needed bombs or bombfish to break open. Smaller cliffs were manageable on foot, but those taller hills, well, you'd need a Crawlchula or another specific echo to get up there. And unlike Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, many of those tools weren't handed to you during the tutorial. You had to earn them by exploring. Skyward Sword leaned the other way. It was extremely linear and narrow in its exploration, but it made excellent use of the come back later with new tools design. Retracing your steps with new items unlocked entirely new areas, which made revisiting old places feel exciting. That's a core part of Zelda's identity. Ever since the original Legend of Zelda on the NES, Hyrule has always been this compact, secret-filled garden of a world, just waiting to be unraveled with the right tools. You explore, you gather items, and those items reward your curiosity by opening up even more secrets. Echoes of Wisdom even introduced linear story beats that actively changed the world as you progressed. That made the setting feel alive, responsive to your actions. So in my opinion, the next Zelda game should aim to blend the best of both worlds. The open-air freedom of the recent entries, and the meaningful limitations of classic design. Give us tools that must be earned. Let key story moments reshape the world. Make exploration rewarding, not just for what you find, but for how you get there, and how your journey reshapes Hyrule itself. That's what makes us want to stay in this world, not just for the gameplay, for the magic of discovering it, piece by piece.
What always draws me in when a new Zelda game is announced isn't just the gameplay or the dungeons, it's the atmosphere. For instance, at the beginning of Breath of the Wild, Link stepping out of the Shrine of Resurrection and suddenly, the whole of Hyrule opens up before you. It felt massive. It humbled you in the face of the journey ahead. It's those moments that not only set the mood, but also makes your mind wander a bit. For example, one of my favorite Zelda moments of all time is not from a dramatic cutscene or boss fight. It's the title screen of Ocarina of Time, just Link riding Epona through the fields at dawn. There's no dialogue, just a soft, haunting melody, and the gentle rhythm of hooves in the grass as they make their way throughout the field. It's quiet, melancholic. It almost feels like a memory of childhood, of adventure, of something slipping just out of reach, capturing the very themes of Ocarina of Time. Speaking of which, Zelda menu screens have a reputation of being layered with a deep emotional atmosphere. Other good examples are Twilight Princess and Majora's Mask. Honestly, I wouldn't mind more menus like these. At times, I would just have these play in the background to just relax with. So in brief, what would I like for the next Zelda game? Well, to have atmospheric moments like this. To find these little moments in time. To find appreciation to just exist. My name is Macintyre, and if you're into thoughtful takes on Zelda and more, feel free to check out my channel. And special thanks goes to my boy Zeltic for having me on here.
Zelda games have been known for their ambitious enemy variety, although set enemies only have one or two key ways to take them down. This is why I appreciate the focused approach of Breath of the Wild, where it only features 3 major types, but it's a variety in which a player engages with them that makes it interesting. You'll also pick up better on an enemy's flurry rush and parry timing when there's less of them, which feels rewarding the more you fight, and pays off big time against the boss fights, when you've trained yourself up for those perfect counters. Having a key focused enemy variety is a good step moving forward to future open worlds, but I still think there's a solid way to increase variety while still keeping the more technical progression intact. Remember your first time entering the desert and the surprise of your first Molduga encounter, which was anything unlike other enemies and mini-bosses you've come across? Or in Tears, the entire desert was populated with an enemy species completely distinctive from the others, which made the region just so unique. I'm not sure why it's just the deserts that got this special treatment, but I think this makes me more intrigued to see more of this in the next open world. There can still be a few key types that litter the map, but if each region had a few exclusives on top of this, even when paired in camps with the normal enemies, it'll make the variety feel richer and more interesting. And I really think this could work, because the Wind Waker was already doing this 20 years prior, with Bokoblins and Moblins making the framework of enemy combat, while regional specific enemies were found at almost every major island, like the Make-Tails only in fiery zones, Redeads in the crypt areas, and even Dekubabas in the forests. And would you believe it if I told you that Wind Waker actually has less enemy variety than Breath of the Wild, despite feeling so much more variant? It just goes to show that the regional foes do leave a big impact on the character of each area. It's why I'll always remember the modern open world deserts for their awesome Molduga fights and Gibdo infestations, but the other regions I only found interesting for their other characteristics, like the environments and caves, so maybe a future Zelda could add this much needed element of seasoning.
Hey Hylians, I'm SuperZeldaGirl. I'm a Zelda YouTuber who makes videos on pretty much anything I can to do with the series, from theories and discussion videos to let's plays, cosplay, and even videos on merchandise. And the main thing that I want to see from the next big mainline Zelda game is not an open world. Well, not entirely. I can't lie, the freedom of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is absolutely amazing and really fun. But I also can't lie in saying it worries me that all of the big games in the series following on will continue with the structure set in these games. I feel that these games are at times too open, and by letting you do anything you want from the get-go makes a lot feel somewhat tacked on. I mean, come on. Big key story moments in both games can easily be missed, forgotten, or collected out of order, leading to big spoilers with the use of the memories and tears. And all of this isn't me saying that open world Zelda games don't work. In fact, I feel Nintendo has done a perfect combination of structure and freedom in Echoes of Wisdom, A Link Between Worlds, and really a lot of older Zelda games. And the structure of these games is what I hope to see going forward. A game with a large, expansive overworld with a lot to do, but one that you still have that bit of structure. You can't go to the final boss right away, and you do have certain roadblocks that stop you from going everywhere until certain points are fulfilled. A non-Zelda game I've always thought did its open world well was Final Fantasy XV. As the game may have an open world, but it's sectioned off into large open zones, and you get to unlock more as you go more throughout the game. Within these zones there's a lot to do, like hidden dungeons and lots of side quests. But you can't continue onwards until you actually follow the story's main quest. It seems pretty simple and, well, a lot of other games do it. It gives you that freedom and sense of adventure, but still makes it so the story is followed and the difficulty slowly builds, something that was also a bit of a pain in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, as you could easily fight a Lionel if you knew what you're doing and get some pretty high gear. I know this is likely a controversial opinion for many, as the complete freedom of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is so special, but like I said before, I always felt that that freedom did come with some compromises. So that's the main thing that I want to see from the next big mainline Zelda game. I did think about talking about the story or dungeons, but when I thought about it, what I wanted to change most in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the game's open structure just seemed to connect to everything I had in mind. I'll be interested to see if anyone agrees with me on this. And before I go, I want to say a big thank you to Zeltic for inviting me to be a part of this video. It really means so much as such a small channel to be recognised by one of the biggest Zelda YouTubers. So thank you very much for including me.
Hey, my name is Sean. I also go by MajorLink on YouTube. And what I want to see in the next Zelda game is more character and emotion with our main characters, mainly Link and Ganon. Zelda has gotten a great glow up in Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, but I feel like Link and Ganon has sort of been sidelined in that regard. Link is silent protagonist, so I know it can kind of be a struggle, but with the series inclusion of voice acting, I think the silence is becoming a bit glaring at this point, and Link's blank stares aren't really passing as much anymore for me. Breath of the Wild did such a good job with some of the scenes because like Zelda would ask Link like a great question and then the memory would end and we wouldn't get that question answered. I kind of just want to go back to where like Link, you know, he had friends and family in some games. He had in Skyward Sword's classmates, he had rivals, he had enemies. He had like an established world there on Skyloft. Wind Waker was the same, the island, everybody knew him. He had a grandma, sister. Ocarina of Time, he had like not really best friends, but he had Saria, he had a father figure. His room had little scratches on it. The Skyward Sword Link had a room, little wood carvings, you could learn a little bit more about Link. Those things are just awesome, and I want more of those. So I'd love to see more expression from Link, more emotion, like maybe he's actively listening. They did a good job in Age of Calamity with Link's animations. I feel like he's a lot more expressive in the way he moves and the way he like picks things up, and he's like with the Gorons eating the rocks and just like he's being a goofball, and I feel like he's just a little bit more expressive in those. Ganon has been one of my biggest gripes with Zelda so far, like Zelda games so far. He's usually been the guy to just be talked about all game, and then he shows up at the end and you beat him. I want that to change. I want him to interact more. It doesn't need to be with Zelda and Link, but like I want him to interact with the world more and have more effect on the world. I want to meet the Gerudo. I want to find out, give him a reason, give him purpose, answer some whys. I feel like in the older games, we met Zant the whole time and then Ganon took over. And Girahim was the same, you know, Demise took over. I feel like if we do Ganon again, let's bring him into the story a lot more. I want to learn more about the Gerudo culture through his eyes. Why is he so mad? I want to know more. I want to know his purpose. I want him to have interests, you know, I want to learn more. Nintendo isn't a stranger to stuff like this, so they know how to do it. Like, for example, in Skyward Sword, Zelda apologizing to Link for using him. Ganon's final speech in Wind Waker is still one of the best Ganons I've seen. His expression and the words he was saying were so good. Burn Sacrifice in Spirit Tracks. I love anti-heroes, so I wish we got to see a little bit more of him. Link saying goodbye to his grandma in Wind Waker. Like all of Majora's Mask, it's so good. They have all of those moments. So to summarize, I'd love to see more emotion and expression from our main character Link. I want him to go back to being grounded in the world like Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker. Ganon, I want to see more interactions. I want to have more screen time. Let's see what his life's like with the Gerudo and why he gets so mad. If he wants to take over Hyrule, that's the only thing. Let's find out why. I don't think there's any harm in that, and finding out a little bit more about him before we have to fight him. And if you do like Zelda's story, I'm currently animating an episodic series called The Legend of Zelda: Hero's Purpose. It's a story about how the Hero of Time becomes the Hero Shade, sort of filling in the gaps between Majora's Mask to Twilight Princess as best as I can. And if you're a big Hero of Time fan, then you're gonna love it.
I'm CaptBurgerson, and over the last 4 years, I've mostly dedicated my channel to analyzing Zelda dungeons, picking them apart, discussing them in detail, and trying to get a sense of just what makes them so good, or occasionally not so good. After Breath of the Wild gave us a massive open-air overworld to explore with somewhat short and, at times, underwhelming dungeons, a particular bit of rhetoric began to emerge from the community, myself included. For the next big Zelda, a lot of people felt that the perfect union of styles would be to integrate into that overworld classic-style dungeons with sprawling, interconnected navigation, locks, and keys. I mostly agree, but I think a critical piece of the conversation missing is the dungeon item. Classic Zelda titles would often reward players about halfway through a dungeon with a new item that granted Link either a new method of mobility, combat prowess, or puzzle interactivity. Some staples would make their way into pretty much every game, such as the bow and boomerang, while some, like Twilight Princess's spinner and ball and chain, would only make a single mainline appearance. The item would then usually be vital to dungeon progression, unlocking parts of the dungeon that you previously couldn't access, or giving you the ability to defeat enemies that you previously couldn't, or sometimes both. Breath of the Wild gave us something similar with the champion's abilities. Though useful, they weren't quite the same. They would be given at the end of the dungeon, therefore not being important to the dungeon progression itself. And because of the open-air format, they were not even mandatory for the game at all. Tears of the Kingdom seemingly tries to correct this by giving you the Sage ability before the dungeon, and to the game's credit, often making the ability very useful within the game's various temples. However, because of the clunky UI, it never feels as satisfying as finding something like the hookshot back in the old games, and these abilities still suffered from the same lack of long-term usefulness. When I play Tears of the Kingdom, I almost always have the Sage abilities completely disabled. So, all this is to say, for the next big Zelda game, I'd really like to see Link's arsenal start to fill up with useful items again. Items that have clever puzzles built around them, good combat utility, or things that just make moving about more interesting. The usefulness of classic dungeon items often used to extend beyond just the borders of the dungeon they were found within, having puzzles scattered around the world that you could stumble upon, then come back to with the item in hand. I love open-air Zelda, but it is designed in such a way that nothing is really inaccessible to you if you're clever or persistent enough, since both games front-load their progression with the mandatory abilities being given to you during the tutorial sections. But there is an inherent satisfaction to overcoming things, to growing more capable throughout the game, and a part of that growth means some pushback. It means not being able to do things at the start of the game, then learning how to deal with whatever is halting you. The aha moments, if you will. This is the sort of gameplay structure that Metroidvanias are built around, and I'm not saying that I want Zelda to entirely lean into that genre, but Zelda dungeons used to be almost like little tangled Metroidvanias set inside a sprawling overworld. I think there is room for that sort of design, and it's possible for Zelda as a series to look back at how they achieved that in the past through its item-based progression system. Besides, the hookshot is just plain old cool, and I just want to say thank you so much for having me on this video. It's been a real pleasure. Cheers.
Hi everyone, Kokiri Theory here. I run a channel where I share my occasionally unhinged Zelda conspiracy theories and lore analysis. I'm so happy to be part of this community and to be here talking about my favorite thing. Basically, for me, I'm hoping that the next Zelda game is one that leans deeply into the legacy and lore of the series while using the new technology of the Switch 2 to innovate and expand the world in meaningful ways. As a Zelda theorist, my ideal game is one that's packed with history, mystery, and connections to the other stories. I want a world that you can get lost in, a game where the story is rich enough to really analyze. Give me lore, give me secrets, give me, I don't know, a cryptic Zonai mural that sends me down the rabbit hole in an hour-long video essay. I'm also really hoping for a game that fuses the best of two styles, the open-world freedom of the Wilds era and the storytelling and dungeon design of the more linear games. I absolutely love the sense of open exploration and discovery in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but there's still something truly special about the structure of games like Twilight Princess or Wind Waker, where dungeons give you new items that feel both central to progressing the story and encourage you to return to areas to explore the world in different ways. And I think with the next title, there's potential to accomplish both things, but on an even more expansive scale, which is really exciting. One of the other things that I've always loved about Zelda is how each game uses the technology of its console in clever or quirky ways. The DS and Wii eras in particular took some big swings. Some hits, some motion control misses.
One at a time. Looks like we're having a little interference here.
But they always delivered fresh and ambitious ideas. I really think the Switch 2 has a lot of potential to get weird with it and push boundaries again. And I'm excited to see how the Zelda team could use the powerful hardware in new and creative ways. On a related note, something else I'd love is bringing back companions. Not only can they facilitate fun aspects of gameplay, they also just add so much to the emotional and narrative depth of the games. Having someone to talk to or guide you through the world can really elevate the journey and help make the player feel a little less alone on the quest. And lastly, this is kind of my personal soapbox, but in the next game, I'd love to see Zelda herself as the protagonist. Nintendo's clearly been testing the waters with Echoes of Wisdom, and I think they've proven that a well-written Princess Zelda can absolutely carry a mainline title. I'd love to see her lead a full 3D adventure, and while I love Link, I think using Zelda will help differentiate the next game from the previous eras. Let her use magic, ancient technology, or if you're feeling crazy, give the girl a sword and see what happens. No matter what, I'm excited for the future of Zelda. Nintendo hasn't let me down yet with the series, so I can't wait to see what they've got up their sleeve with this next game. Well, that is, unless the game is like a gritty reboot of Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land. Then I'd be a little bit concerned. But anyway, thank you so much to Zeltic for having me. I'm such a big fan, and this channel was one of my biggest inspirations to start making videos of my own, so it's truly an honor to be part of this.
Hello everyone, I'm Zelda Lore, a content creator focused on the lore of the Zelda series, and someone who loves game design as well. Those familiar with me know that I've been pretty critical of the direction Tears of the Kingdom took, especially when it comes to progression, in both gameplay and story. Progression is how a game structures the order of objectives, items, and abilities. It's the backbone of the Zelda formula. Even the original NES Zelda gave you freedom to explore, but certain areas were gated until you had the right item, like needing the raft to cross a river, or requiring the 8 shards of the Triforce of Wisdom to gain access to the final dungeon. That created a satisfying sense of growth and discovery. This formula evolved over the years, sometimes in lead more open, while other times more linear, but progression was always there. It inspired entire genres, like Metroidvanias and Souls-like, which exist because of it. Blocked paths build anticipation, and overcoming them feels meaningful. But Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom broke from that, by allowing the player to tackle anything, including the final boss from the start. The game had to treat nearly everything else as optional. That freedom sounds great on paper, but it forced the developers to flatten progression and storytelling alike. Nothing feels essential, nothing evolves, and the world stays static. Compare that to Echoes of Wisdom. Despite its smaller scale, it smartly blended traditional structure with open exploration. Zelda could roam the world, but dungeons were unlocked in a specific sequence while also allowing player choice, letting the story and world change with their progress. For example, if you went to later areas early, such as Goron City, instead of being able to tackle that dungeon early, you would be treated as a visitor instead, as that particular area of the world had not yet been affected by the rifts. That made the world feel alive, in a way that Tears of the Kingdom didn't. I actually broke down the Zelda series progression into 3 models. The NES model, a set of required dungeons before the final boss. The A Link to the Past model, which had a set of dungeons followed by a game-changing twist, followed by a second set of dungeons before the final boss, which is basically the NES model, just expanded, and finally the Breath of the Wild model, which falls apart, since everything is optional and loops back to what you could do from the beginning. Echoes of Wisdom followed the A Link to the Past model, and it worked, while simultaneously incorporating the new multiplicative design philosophies of Breath of the Wild. The formula was never the problem. What hurt Zelda games in the past was too much hand-holding, not the narrative structure itself. And then there's the memory system. I don't want stories told entirely in flashbacks scattered across the map. If you find those memories which tell a linear story out of order, the narrative becomes confusing and emotionally flat, and that is not good pacing. Twilight Princess, on the other hand, did it right. It's a game that also has flashbacks, but unlike Tears of the Kingdom, they were revealed at specific points in the story, like Ganondorf's execution or Sans invasion, enhancing the plot as you went. Tears of the Kingdom got close with memories tied to main story events, like the memory of Ganondorf's army after defeating Phantom Ganon, or the memory after saving the Deku Tree of Link and Zelda re-obtaining the Master Sword. But then, it also had instances of repeating the same cutscene 4 times for each stage after each dungeon, just to ensure that players saw it. Why did it do that? Because the game has no real structure, and because you can do anything in any order, the game has to ensure that the player sees that cutscene, no matter the order in which they tackle the dungeons. So, what do I want going forward? I want meaningful progression, a world that changes, a story that unfolds with the gameplay. Freedom, yes, but not at the cost of direction. Not a sandbox full of optional side quests, but an adventure where my actions matter. Nintendo doesn't need to start over, they don't need to reinvent the wheel. They had a working formula, and Echoes of Wisdom showed that it still works. Now I want to see it scaled up, blending open-air exploration with the storytelling and progression that made Zelda legendary. That's the Zelda that I fell in love with, and that's the Zelda that I want to see again.
Hey everybody, my name is Gossip Geist, and I am a Zelda theorist here on YouTube that likes to approach the art of theory crafting with a tinge of unhinged. As a result, the majority of my content is usually centered around thinking outside the box kind of stuff that has absolutely no business making any sense, and yet somehow it does. But to me, that's the best part. Extracting coherence out of what initially seems to be completely disconnected Zelda titles is one of my favorite aspects about this series. To me, there's nothing more satisfying than stumbling across clear-cut evidence that our time spent in a previous Zelda title has directly influenced the Kingdom of Hyrule in which I find myself today. Evidence such as the actions of Zelda at the end of Ocarina of Time depriving the adult timeline of a hero, which eventually led to the flooding of Hyrule in The Wind Waker, or the more subtle implications such as Twilight Princess Link possibly being born from a union between Ocarina of Time Link and Malon from Lon Lon Ranch, which would neatly explain his lifestyle as a ranch hand and would also make the final words of the hero shade cut that much deeper. Unapologetic continuity within the Zelda series is one of the most significantly endearing aspects of this franchise that keeps a lot of fans heavily invested in the ongoing story unfolding before us with each new entry. Zelda games should not be afraid to announce their relation to a previous title, even if that announcement is hidden beneath a metric ton of abstract debris. Zelda theorists such as myself were meticulously designed in a lab somewhere and placed on this planet specifically to excavate those piles of debris in order to bring to light all possible slivers of evidence that might exist. It's just what we're built for. So instead of shying away from being upfront about a Zelda game's unique circumstances, they should embrace the idea that it's perfectly fine to lean on a previous Zelda title in order to explain why this title is the way that it is. Tears of the Kingdom is a game that takes place roughly 7 years after the events of Breath of the Wild, so we should realistically come across an absolute treasure trove of direct references to the previous game, and yet it feels as if they're barely even aware of each other's existence, such as the majority of Tears of the Kingdom's NPCs having no idea who Link is. I truly hope that stuff like this does not become the norm moving forward with the Zelda series, because when you remove the weight of your actions in a previous Zelda title, you just as equally remove the player's investment in the outcome of the next one, since apparently Link's accomplishments won't even matter or be remembered in the next game anyway. Majora's Mask does an excellent job of suggesting to the player that the few characters that originated from Hyrule, such as the Happy Masked Salesman and Skull Kid, might actually be familiar with Link from their brief interactions with him in Ocarina of Time. Incredibly small details like this can go a very long way in providing a crucial sense of purpose and adds a substantial level of value to the player's adventures from game to game. If you choose to exclude the interconnectivity and the mingling aspects between the Zelda titles, then this series would no longer be called The Legend of Zelda, because without the ability to pass along established history, even in the most subtle of ways, onto the next generation, then there would no longer be any legends to tell. For a legend to be born, a legend must have lived. Let's just pray that the legend that lived didn't take place over 10 to 30,000 years ago again. And that is my biggest hope for the next major Zelda title to follow through with. Thank you so much for having me, Zeltic. I truly appreciate it.
When Skyward Sword finally hit the scene, we saw one new mechanic that I actually liked a lot, even though I'm not a big fan of this specific Zelda title. During your adventures, you had to repair your gear and upgrade it in order to defeat any enemies and obstacles you would encounter, which was a great idea. And in many ways, Nintendo took this to the next level in the games that came after. In Breath of the Wild, you could upgrade all kinds of armor sets, which gave you new powers, or just made them better. Meanwhile, Tears of the Kingdom added the fuse mechanic, allowing you to make weapons out of almost anything, which was a great idea because many of the resources you could find in Breath of the Wild were rather useless. However, I think Nintendo can improve on a lot of these concepts. An upgrading and crafting mechanic that combines all the good parts of Skyward Sword and the Nintendo Switch titles. Because in many ways, the approach of the last two titles was flawed. Sure, weapons had to break, otherwise the whole open world concept could be exploited in seconds. But it is also rather annoying. My girlfriend is playing through the game right now for the very first time, and is constantly annoyed by it. So I think Nintendo should change 4 things in the future. 1. Durability should decrease due to mistakes. This was seen in Skyward Sword with the shields, for example. Parrying wouldn't decrease durability, but direct blocks would. This concept should return in future titles. If you use a weapon, shield, or other item correctly, it will last longer. So, for example, don't just smack your sword into a shield over and over. Don't keep your bow drawn out too long, and parry instead of block with a shield. 2. Fusing should have more permanent effects. Fusing solved the problem of weapon durability to an extent, but it would be better if the effects were a bit more permanent. For example, being able to create thunder or flame weapons using the gems you can find in the game, instead of just attaching them to arrows to create an elemental effect. Sure, this might require some sort of blacksmithing mechanic, but I think that could be fun, and the Gorons would be a perfect fit for this role. 3. Upgraded armor sets should be visually distinct. Being able to upgrade sets is great, but there's one thing incredibly disappointing about it all. The set does not change one bit as it becomes better and better, which is very disappointing. I would love it if it became more detailed and pretty as you upgrade it. This is seen in so many games. For example, World of Warcraft, which both I and Zeltec are big fans of. So I think Nintendo should add this to their next title. 4. Permanent items that you can also upgrade need to return. While I enjoyed all the cool Sheikah and Zonai powers, I do want to see classic Zelda items return. And of course, they should be upgradable, just like they were in Skyward Sword. I miss items like the hookshot, magical rings, medallions, iron boots, and more. So I would love to see those as well as new ones in the next Zelda game. Now those are the things I would change. But before I head off, be sure to check out my channel, Dr. Wily, if you're into myth-busting videos. Because with the Nintendo Switch 2 on the horizon, a lot of new videos are on the way.
One of the best things the Zelda series ever did was make you feel out of place in Gerudo Town in Breath of the Wild. In a way, this is an extension of Clock Town in Majora's Mask, where you're put in an environment where you don't feel like you're the main character for a second. The culture you're trying to be a part of is not your own. And so you have to jump through hoops. You have to learn things in order to fit in and be accepted And I think that's incredibly powerful when it comes to storytelling, especially in a game where players are playing as the chosen one, as the hero. To feel small and insignificant for a second, but then to prove yourself and adapt to the culture, I think is wonderful. If I could request anything in future Zelda games, it would be to have more of this. To travel to Goron Town and to learn their ways, and then to adapt, to fit in, to be accepted, so then you're trusted with quests. Over to Zora's domain, where you've done the same thing again, you need to prove that you're a great swimmer. And then over to the Ruto, maybe you need to prove that you're not scared of heights or something. I think that would be incredible, and it would make everything feel a bit more richer and a bit more alive from a world building perspective, that there's breath in these games, that this is a living, breathing world with cultures that are different from everyone else's.
Hey friends, it's me Zoe from the Dreamshine. If you see my research, you know that I essentially use Zelda games as a giant archaeology simulator. When I think about the next Zelda game, I think about the places that I find myself going back to over the years, making me ask the question, what happened here? The core experience of the environment in the Era of the Wilds feels like one giant puzzle to me, and I hope that we get to see more of that. Something that I find myself wanting more too is more character development like we saw in the Era of the Wilds. In the case of Zelda, we finally got to see her become her own person, with her own emotions, thoughts, feelings, fears, flaws, successes, and failures. I'd love to see more of that exploration, and probably with more than Zelda as well. If I could ask for any setting and know for sure that they would actually use it, I would ask for a game finally taking place in the Era of Chaos. I want to see what actually happened during the Interloper War. Most importantly, I want to know if the Zonai were responsible for sealing the Twilight. I'd also love to see the sky, the surface, and the depths become a new default for games going forward, but with a greater emphasis on exploration and more storytelling than what we got in Tears of the Kingdom. Though I thoroughly enjoyed being able to get to places and see them from different heights, one of the things that I hope that we do not see a return of is having to build things like quadcopters to get to places. I'd rather have another exploration mechanic aside from that doesn't involve such a technology focus. Finally, I'd really, really love to see them find a way to strike a balance between openness and traditional design in terms of the way that Zelda games used to be. I feel that Echoes of Wisdom really nailed this, and it's something that they could learn from as they move forward and continue to create new games.
Hello there, my name is Triforce Times, and today I'm going to go over what I'd like to see from the next Legend of Zelda. So I've got a mini wish list I'd like from the Zelda team for the next Legend of Zelda game, and it breaks down into 3 key points. So first of all, better dungeons. Second, combine elements of open world and linear Zelda. And finally, a brand new location. So first of all, with the better dungeons, so the dungeons in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were pretty lackluster. And I would like to see the Zelda team create epic dungeons again, for example, the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time. With the introduction of open world Zelda, it felt like much of the effort and focus from the Zelda team had been on the open world itself, Hyrule, and making it an interesting place to explore and exist. So while this is great, that left dungeons feeling repetitive and not quite up to the standard that we're used to when it comes to Zelda games. So when I think back to the dungeons in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, only the Wind Temple and the Lightning Temple from Tears of the Kingdom stand out to me. Unfortunately, none of the dungeons in Breath of the Wild stick out to me as memorable. So Tears of the Kingdom did do some work to improve some elements of the dungeons. For example, the Wind Temple had an epic journey to get there, and then each dungeon had a unique boss. So I would love to see the Zelda team create epic dungeon experiences like, for example, the Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword, or the Stone Temple Tower from Majora's Mask. Well, next up we've got the mixture of open world and linear, so while I'm a fan of open world Zelda, I would love to see the Zelda team bring back elements of linear gameplay progression. So I'm not really a huge fan of getting everything at the start of the game. I think we could combine the best parts of open world Zelda with elements of linear Zelda from the past, and imagine combining Breath of the Wild and Ocarina of Time together. For example, imagine an open world Hyrule as we've experienced in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but then we encounter a major story beat and new parts of the map open up. For example, maybe we get a boat and we could sail to another continent. So as we progress through the game, narrative events could impact the world that we experience, and then new gameplay experiences open up as a result. Well, finally, what I'd really like to see is a brand new location. We've enjoyed our time in Hyrule in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for 8 years, and while Hyrule was expanded in Tears of the Kingdom with caves, sky islands and the depths, it's definitely time to move on to somewhere new. Either we see a new Hyrule dramatically changed, or we go to a new location entirely. Well, that is what I would like to see from the next Zelda game from the Zelda team, and a huge thank you to Zeltic for inviting me to contribute towards this project. If you'd like to hear more from me, then come and hang out with us at Triforce Times on YouTube. I cover 100% Zelda content through guides, theories and news, so thank you everyone, and I'm going to hand over to another fantastic Zelda creator.
Hey guys, it's NintendoBlackCrisis, aka that one guy obsessed with swirls to the point where even the creators of Uzumaki would be jealous. It's crazy to think that it's been 2 years since Tears of the Kingdom released, and honestly, my opinions of it haven't really changed. I love the game, but unlike other installments, this has little to do with the narrative. Most of my enjoyment comes from the gameplay aspect of it, abilities like Fuse and Ultra Hand. Don't get me wrong, there are some fantastic moments in the story, but overall it feels like one of the game's weakest links. Pun intended. Let's talk a bit about the past and how it's presented in the most recent open-world 3D Zelda title. Tears of the Kingdom feels overly ambitious, splitting its narrative between 2 different times. Rather than expand on historical events present in its prequel, it instead adds an entirely new era all about the Zonai, with most of it being locked behind the memory system. It does try to balance it out by sprinkling tidbits of lore in the present, mostly through its structures, but aside from some interesting things like the ancient stone tablets and bigger sky islands, much of it feels similar. We don't even see any sort of ancient Zonai city or settlement, the closest being that era's Hyrule Castle, which is only present in the memories. Obviously, I'm not expecting us to interact with live Zonai, given the gap in time, and there is an attempt at fixing this since the constructs act as an in-between, even disclosing some interesting bits of info from time to time, but there's a huge imbalance between what the player is given in the present compared to Zelda's memories. In Breath of the Wild, the 100-year gap makes its history much less muddied. Not only are there structures, but also written entries, including dialogue from characters who lived through those events, like the Zora and Sheikah. Tears of the Kingdom also includes this from time to time, but in the former, it feels much more plentiful. The Zelda team could have expanded on events such as the Great Calamity, but don't have to. Meanwhile, it feels like a piece is missing with Tears of the Kingdom. It doesn't have that balance between the past and present. Sometimes there is a huge disconnect between what the player sees in the memories to what's experienced in the present. Characters continue to act in ignorance even after Link discovers the truth about Puppet Zelda. Why not change up some of the dialogue so that it's dependent on what the player has or hasn't discovered? Maybe even include some minor adjustments to the story. It also creates an issue of being spoiled early on, if the player watches one of the later memories early in the game. The system works more in Breath of the Wild because Link is told the vital parts of the plot before stepping off the Great Plateau. Rather than Link's past being some huge twist which could potentially spoil the game if a player were to view the memories in the incorrect order, it's all laid out at the beginning. Breath of the Wild's memories still include vital pieces of information, but their inclusion is less out of obligation and more so there to expand upon that game's characters. There's less of a pressure to have to watch these in order since we already know the general story. What I'm trying to say is that the Zelda team needs to either fully commit to a past history or focus solely on the present. This doesn't mean that there can't be a past. In most Zelda games, the past is what creates conflict and shapes the present, even more so than other franchises. Stuff like the interlopers in Twilight Princess, Hylia's battle against Demise in Skyward Sword, or the drowning of Hyrule in Wind Waker. All of these vary in terms of how much relevance they have to the current day, but there's never that imbalance felt in games like Tears of the Kingdom. You'd expect a group as influential as the Zonai, ones who founded the Kingdom of Hyrule, to have more influence. The Zelda team can absolutely make the past and present of a game feel equally impactful, so long as it doesn't feel like one of the two is compromised by doing so. And given how the most recent Zelda games have emphasized the past, perhaps it's time for a change of pace. I'd love to see a Zelda game where we are part of that main narrative, where it feels like our actions have a much bigger impact on the world, whether that means gameplay segments in a past era or a focus on the here and now. Oh, and that includes a villain that's more involved with the plot. No more sitting around in a single spot for the duration of the game or having all of their cool moments be locked behind memories or past events. Please?
And that's it. 30 Zelda YouTubers' takes on what they want to see in the next mainline Zelda game. Though each creator had a unique perspective on this, there are multiple elements that it seems many people are in agreement on, topics that appeared throughout many different submissions, such as the desire for a return to the classic Zelda formula that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom abandoned, traditional items, story structure, and, in particular, dungeons. To see these elements blended into a new, open-air world for Link to explore in the next title. With this in mind, the huge amount of praise thrown in Echoes of Wisdom's direction in this video makes sense. That game really is something of a compromise, taking elements from both classic Zelda and the new, Wild-era open format. While it'd be impossible to summarize an hour and a half of Zelda creators' thoughts at the end of the video, it does seem that, generally, this community yearns for the series to reintroduce many of its classic conventions, to follow Link's journey in Breath of the Wild, and remember the greatness in its past. This project was an absolute blast to put together, and I again need to give a massive thank you to every creator who took the time to throw their hat into the ring here. It's an absolute honor to host so much talent in one of my videos, and I feel so humbled and so grateful to be in a position to bring this many fantastic creators together for a project like this. It really is a testament to the magic of the Zelda series. These games have brought so many people together and fostered such a fantastic, welcoming community, one that I'm honored to be a part of. And although this video was all about our hopes for what's next, it's worth looking back and appreciating what we've already got. 21 of the greatest video games ever made. So, as I said in the beginning, please check out the people featured and fill up your sub box with some amazing Zelda content. But I don't only want to hear the opinions of Zelda YouTubers on this. I'd love to hear your opinions too. It was fascinating reading all of your takes in the comments on my last wishlist video, so please let me know in the comments not only what you think of the opinions presented in this video, but your own wishes for the Zelda series' next mainline entry. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.